Welcome to this week's episode of Everyday Thin Places. I'm Rachel Gallagher, and I'm an interfaith hospice chaplain.
And I'm Elizabeth Ferrasso, and I'm a birth doula.
And in each episode of Everyday Thin Places, we draw from our experiences supporting birthing people and dying people to explore with honesty, authenticity, and humor how we can all become more truly living people.
All right, Rachel, I told you so. Not that you didn't believe me, but I told you you were going to love talking to my friends, my doula colleague, Elizabeth Weinstein.
Oh my goodness.
We could have, I think we could have kept her for hours.
Yeah.
We will definitely, this won't be the last time you hear from her, but it was just amazing to hear from her. I know our listeners are going to love this.
Yeah, you tried to prep me, but she really impressed me with just her background and all of the things that she had to share about how dance and being a doula fit together and how those parts of her relate to all of us.
All of us.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, you're going to be sad when it's over. You're going to be jealous that we got to hang out with Elizabeth, and you're going to be excited about the fact that we've already decided this will not be the last time that we feature her on this podcast. But here's your dose for today, our interview with the dancing doula, Elizabeth Weinstein. All right, so today we are talking to someone who I'm so excited to have here with us, Elizabeth Weinstein. I'm going to call you Elizabeth, the dancing doula, because as we have this conversation today, we're going to talk about your background as a dancer and also your work as a doula and how those beautifully complement each other. And I think you have some beautiful wisdom and life experience and insights to offer about how you have learned to see everyday thin places based on these experiences you have. So first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about how you became a dancer, how you became a doula, how you became a doula, a dancing doula? Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Let me think. I've been dancing my entire life. When I was really little, I think my mom, I was like, this activity, that activity. And I think it became really clear that movement was something that really compelled me. And when I was from, I guess, the age of like 7 to 16 or 17, I was a ballerina, like super, super ballerina, really studied ballet very intensely, 2 to 3 classes every day while I was in middle school and high school, like just training really seriously. I studied with APT for a summer. And I think from there, I stepped back kind of the last years of high school. I was like really longing for like some semblance of a normal life where I could hang out with friends. And so I really transitioned away from dance, and kind of found my way back to dance in college through contact improv and improvisation. And sort of the logic behind that was that, I knew that movement was something that was important to me and really central to my sense of well-being and engagement with the world. And so my plan was sort of, okay, I will, take 1 dance class a semester so that I can better engage with my thinking mind. And, I'll study women's health, I'll study public health. I, kind of always was sort of interested in thinking about midwifery and reproductive justice. And that was sort of like the core of my academic studies. And I kind of just wanted to support that with, a movement class. So the contact improv, which is, for those who don't know, it's an improvisational dance form. It's sort of based on this idea of bodies in contact, when they, when they share a point of weight, when a body is dependent on another body to hold it up, when you sort of destabilize that point of contact, there's an incredible improvisation that occurs, right? You're sort of like following this point of contact through space and across someone else's body. And that becomes this like incredible duet. It's awesome. And so that kind of practice and this kind of like practice of improvisation sort of took over my life more and more and more and more. I, was continuing to study public health. I spent a semester living in Brazil, like studying with, old midwives, kind of thinking about, the role of ritual in traditional birth practices and the medicalization of birth. But I came back, and by my senior year, I was like, choreographing and, in a dance company, and really most of my days was consumed with movement and the work of the body. And I kind of had a commitment when I graduated that I was like, okay, I know I'm always going to be a birth worker, and I'm just going to put that on hold, because I know that if I don't actually like step into the world and attempt to be a dancer and to kind of follow that line of vision, I'll always regret it. So I moved back to Philly in 2012, and I danced professionally for a couple, for years. I was in a company. I was a movement educator. I toured to Taiwan. I did a bunch of different stuff, and kind of, I would say in like, what year is it? 2020. In like 2017 or something, things kind of started to taper out, and I started feeling less and less compelled by the creative work that was available to me in Philadelphia, and more urgent and sort of like self-deprecating about like, ugh, you want to be a doula. Why can't you just do it? Why haven't you done this yet? This thing. And so I think it was in 2017, I ended up just sort of making a decision. I decided to, I apprenticed with Britt McCullum with her doula mentorship program, and I just sort of like, it felt like a really clear transitional moment where I was like, okay, now is the moment. And so that's when I sort of jumped more full-time into doing birth work and working as a doula full-time. Yeah.
Wow. And one thing I remember from when we talked before, and I have a book sitting in my Audible queue, is the book The Red Tent. Mm-hmm. That was a part of your story too, of just sort of the universe sending you all of these cues of reading that book and thinking about birth work and getting a ride with someone who is a lactation consultant, and the universe sort of cornered you into, hello, my dancing person, it's time for you now to launch into this birth work.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's about like a certain patience, a certain like knowing, being patient enough to like take the step when the moment is right. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's kind of what I was waiting for the doors to open, to be able to be like, now is the right time to step more fully into your work as a birth worker. And I think for the first year or so of that, I was really just like, okay, birth work, like I am not a dancer anymore. I am a doula, and, like all of these trainings and all, just like kind of establishing myself in this world. And then I think, I don't know, like a year or two ago, I started just becoming really curious about like, actually, where do these two pieces of myself get to come together? Because obviously they're related. Obviously they're like deeply interconnected. And so I think from there, I've been kind of trying to figure out the ways that like, how do you translate this like thinking about like embodiment and improvisation and movement, and how do you put that in line with the work of birth? And I think that's kind of, that's something that feels really fascinating to me.
So how do you?
Well, I mean, it's so funny. I think a year ago, maybe, Leah Stein, she's a woman, she's a choreographer in Philadelphia. She has a company called the Liaison Dance Company that is so beautiful. She's one of my favorite choreographers in the city, and she teaches a workshop for dancers called deep listening. It's a deep listening practice, which is basically kind of using the teaching of Paulina Oliveros, who's a composer who sort of uses this like deep listening practice of listening deeply to the sounds of your environment, and then kind of responding to that. And then Leah's workshops sort of invite you to respond to those sensory inputs with movement. And she always tells this story about how I had a client who was also a dancer in her company who like took that workshop. And a lot of it is about like, listening and then responding to the sensory stimuli of the environment with movement, and then responding to that with sounding and vocalizing, and like using the body to vocalize, and then using the vocalization to compel movement from the body. And so my friend, who was my client, who was a dancer, took this workshop, and it just like transformed her birth experience. She like birthed, so, I don't know, her birth was a beautiful, beautiful birth, but she kind of like went back to Leah in tears afterwards and was like, oh my God, like I can't tell you what a difference taking that workshop made for me in my experience of my own birth. So then Leah approached me and was like, okay, listen, you're a dancer and a birth worker, and like we have to do something. And so, you know, I think it's so, in some ways I was like, oh God, like it felt almost embarrassing to kind of like be that fully myself in a moment of like fully my dancer self, where there's like all of this language of like embodiment and movement and, you know, improvisation, which sort of feels like foreign language in the world of birth, you know, but that actually like when you think about, you know, the work of labor, which is sort of this like innate physiological process, that in order to find your way through birth, there's sort of this surrender that needs to happen to the body and to the impulse of the body. And that if you can kind of figure out how to like release into that, you know, those impulses of the body and follow that is sort of a dance that ends up kind of moving you towards bringing your baby into the world, and kind of like having the capacity to like use movement and use sounding and have all of that have like this innate impulse around kind of letting your body move in the ways that it knows how, I think is one way to have like a pretty connected birth experience. Yeah.
Wow. So I want to actually find a quote from you, because we know each other. We're in a very exclusive club that I like to talk
There's
about.
only 2 members of this club.
There's only 2 members of this club. There might be more that we haven't met yet. In a club of doulas named Elizabeth who live in West Philadelphia. We're taking applications. If you're listening,
contact us if you know anyone.
Go to everydaythinplaces.com. Send us an email. But because we have spent time together before, there's some words that you shared with me that I feel like they're powerful, and they're powerful not just thinking about how we approach birth, but how we approach life. So you talked about how physical connection, movement, and body-based mindfulness practices and a deep trust in the innate wisdom of the body are essential for labor. And I'm going to say that I think they're essential not just for labor, but for life, because life is work, right? But that term, innate wisdom of the body, I use it all the time. Rachel, you probably don't hear people talking like that on a daily basis, and maybe our listeners haven't either. So tell us more about what you mean and what that means to you to think about the innate wisdom of the body, and how movement and body-based mindfulness can help people to access that.
Yeah, I think I want to like complicate that question a little bit by remembering that, you know, it's not, to me, it's not like, oh yeah, just like trust your body and go with the flow. Like that's not really what I have in mind, I guess, when I use those words. I think it's sort of like, I don't know, birth and life, and, you know, just thinking about like the messiness of the human body, kind of the messiness of birth, the like breaking open, the messiness of trauma, the histories that we carry in our own body, and using that as, I don't know, I'm someone who I feel like we carry the stories of our life in our body, right? Like we carry the histories of our grandmothers in our bodies, like my hands are the same hands of my own mother, and, you know, all of these ways that we are, our bodies like tell stories. And so I think that for me, when I think about the innate wisdom of the body, is about really letting ourselves like remember and know about that messiness in our own bodies, and to actually have a sense of connecting back to impulse or connecting back to intuition, and letting I don't know, letting yourself be guided by a sense that like the body knows more than we might give it credit for, you know? So sort of putting down the analytical mind of how should I walk down the street today, and like letting your body sort of engage with the space around you in ways that can offer surprises, like surprise encounters, you know, and that for me feels like a guiding principle around how to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a way that we do life. I think it's obviously as doulas sort of how we do our work. I think it's also, Rachel, how you do your job. When we talked about as a chaplain, you depend highly upon your skills of improvisation, and that we have this, how do we tap into, again, not your neocortex. It's not because Rachel has read the books and the chaplain book said, do this in this situation. And it's not as doulas, like, yeah, we've read books. We've all read lots of books and gone to lots of workshops, but we tap into this deeper part of who we are. Physiologically, yes, it's the deeper part of your brain. It's the more primal parts of your brain. I tell people all the time, like, you don't give birth with your neocortex. It's these deeper parts of your brain that release the right hormones. And I think dance is that. I think that you move. I look at my own children. They don't have the baggage that I have of an upbringing where dance was not only not really encouraged or experienced, but it was actually forbidden in some circumstances. We had banquets at our high school because you couldn't dance. Just quick stories. I remember a friend the college that she went to, a faith-based college, where they would bring in like artists for like Christian rock band concerts. And the distinct rule was you can move your bodies up and down, but you can't move side to side.
Wow.
So there's this idea of like your body is dangerous. Your body's going to take you into dangerous territory. And but I watch my kids, and when there's music, they move. They just move. And I think that is innate to the human experience, that these deep parts of your brain and these deep parts of your body hear music, notice pain, notice someone else's joy, and your body just responds. And so I think dance is obviously a very distinct and beautiful expression of that, but it is so universally human that of course our bodies respond when we let them, and we connect to that inner wisdom, and that inner wisdom is very much intricately connected to the people who came before us and all the people alive on the planet with us right now.
I think there's so much beauty in that, and I admire that. Like, that is, I listen to what you're saying, Elizabeth, and I just think there's something so precious about what you're describing. But at the same time, for those who maybe listened to my episode or didn't listen to the episode where I talk about my story a little bit, and Elizabeth, we don't know each other well, but that is not how I feel about my body. And so I just wonder, for someone like me, I feel like I can't really trust my body. That innate wisdom, perhaps it was there, or maybe it is there, but I can't fully trust it because I feel like my body failed me. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with cancer. It caused basically like paralysis of my legs. And through the healing process, I had to relearn how to walk at 24 years old. And so I have a bit of a different experience and a different relationship with my body, one that I don't necessarily always feel like I can trust my body in those ways. And so I just wonder, how would you speak to someone who maybe comes from that sort of relationship with their body? Perhaps it's illness, perhaps it's being told that your body can't be trusted to dance, perhaps it's trauma. How do you work with people who are coming from that place?
That is such a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is that I think trust comes in really small gestures, you know, that like, I think when I say dance, I'm not thinking at this moment in my life about like the performance of dance or like the choreography of, you know, a stage. That's not what I'm thinking about. I think I'm thinking about like the physical existence of, you know, our hands on our knees, our capacity to sit in a chair. And for me, something that feels really powerful about movement work, about working as a birth worker, about these practices that require bodies to come together, is like the places of contact, and how can you let your body like trust that it is being held up by the floor if you're lying on the floor? Or how can you trust that like if I'm, you know, leaning against another body, that body is helping me to stand, and that, you know, if the other body were to step away, we would both like go tumbling and, you know, find some other pathway forward. And so, yeah, you know, I think that for me, it's about how do you trust the body if it's been untrustworthy? I think for me, I guess my personal story is thinking about as like, for me as a survivor of trauma, of sexual violence, not necessarily trusting other bodies. And so how do you kind of come back to a physical experience where like you can lean against someone else and have just that be like this incredible human experience of like, I'm standing here and you're standing here, and like that point of contact together could be the beginning of some impulse that we can follow together, and then that becomes a dance, you know? So I guess like when I'm working with families who are thinking about giving birth and thinking about movement, it's about like, how do you step back into your body? How do you like take a deep breath and have like a slow grumble and feel that vibration in your body? And then how do you feel that vibration move through the rest of your body? And just like these small places of sensation that can kind of return us to ourselves. So, you know, I think it's not necessarily about like having all of the faith in the body already, but letting like these small acts of depending on the body or depending on another body, or letting your body rest on the floor and be like, this floor is holding me up right now, you know, and letting that be a step forward towards recovery. I don't know. It feels like it's all about healing.
I like that. And I even just taking it to like everyday life, right? That's what we want to talk about as well on this podcast. You know, I've struggled with just trusting my body to do yoga. Yeah. You know, Elizabeth, you and I have talked about, Elizabeth Verasso, you and I have talked about neither one of us is what we would call a yogi.
Right.
And I think part of that for me is that feeling of like, I don't want to think about my body. I don't want to put all of my focus and energy on my body. But perhaps a good exercise for me would be, maybe yoga for me is lying on the floor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a name for that. Yoga Nidra? Is that correct?
I think
it's like sleeping yoga.
Yeah. I think that's my yoga, because I'm coming from a place where I have to take these small little steps. And that's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
I think it's so important too, this perspective. I'm so glad you asked that question, Rachel, because it's not just in life where people feel like their bodies have betrayed them, but I know, Elizabeth, I'm sure you've experienced, as I have, where we have clients who feel like their bodies have betrayed them because they have done all the things. They've hired a doula, they've taken the classes, they ate the healthy things, they did all the exercise, and they expect a healthy vaginal birth. And then as it turns out, their body and their baby are participating in birth in such a way that the safest, healthiest place for them to meet their baby is in the operating room with a cesarean birth. And that can feel like a betrayal of your body. And so it's so important, I think, for us, the reframing to where we say, all right, well, let's figure out where things have worked well, and we can give ourselves credit. So I'm going to give you credit that you are smart enough to pick a hospital and a caregiver to give birth to where when this became necessary, your doctor or your midwife figured it out, and that your partner was there with you in the operating room. And all these other pieces of the people that we lean on, I like how you point out these points of contact, that we develop trust with people that we can lean on, and the body, the skills of the surgeon, Rachel, the brain, the wisdom of the people that knew they wanted to be a doctor their whole lives and were the doctors that treated you and brought you to a place of healing and recovery and remission. None of us stands alone. We don't. If we think we stand alone, it is pure illusion, that there is this absolute interconnectedness between us and all other humans. And so this deep trust in the body is sort of the deep trust in the corporate body, that we have a collective wisdom of humans alive now, of all the humans that have ever lived that came before us. I say that in my birth classes. I'm like, you're here because birth worked for all the people, generations upon generations. That's why you're here in this class with me. And so it's not a pretty perfect picture. It's not, we know, we've been in the trenches. Doula work is not like birth is perfect and beautiful and it's easy and it's just do this and it'll turn out great, because we're in some really painful circumstances that, Rachel, I think we see, me and the other Elizabeth, West Philadelphia doula, we see sort of like mostly the beauty of birth with the streaks of pain in it. And I think you have such an interesting perspective because you're walking through very painful places with people, but you catch all of these glimpses of the beauty in it. And so I think that's where all of our minds and our hearts come together, that we have so much to talk about, because life is, like, as Glennon Doyle says it, life is brutal. It's beautiful and it's brutal, but we get to be in it together. And isn't that incredible?
Yeah. And, I will say, thinking about when I was working professionally as a dancer, the sensation of like vital aliveness that I felt when I was moving full out, like completely, like just like filling the space, sweating, moving in collaboration with other bodies. There's like a certain vitality that I felt in me, which was why I decided to be a dancer. And I was uncertain that there was any other place in my life where I could attain that kind of raw sense of like vitality and connectedness with the world. And now that I work full time as a doula, movement is certainly part of my practice, but I really have that same sense of like vital connectedness whenever I'm at a birth, whenever someone is like leaning against my body as they push out a baby, that sort of sense of arrival and like sweaty vitality is just as present in that space. And so for me, I feel like there's actually very little distinction between like dancing and, working as a doula, because it does feel like, I don't know, maybe that's this place that we're talking about within places, but like that does feel like kind of like a very similar connection to like the aliveness. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I'm going to ask a leading question because I think I already know. Do you dance at home? Do you dance at home during quarantine when you can't go places? Add that expression. And from that, I would love to talk about, what about all of our listeners who maybe some of them have some hangups like I do. Some of them have no hangups and they love to dance, and that's a beautiful part of their life. Some people may have danced professionally, even if it was sweet little ballet class. Like, I can envision you as a... Can we get a picture? Can we please put that on our Instagram feed this week? I want sweet little Elizabeth ballerina. So we're people that are approaching this from all different ways, but if we believe that thin places are universal, and if we believe that dance and embodiment is a portal to a bigger sense of reality and a greater sense of connectedness, two-part question. One, tell me about you dancing in your everyday life. And two, can you think of suggestions of how people listening are going to do that in their own lives?
Mm-hmm. I dance at home less than you would expect. I have been, a very dear friend of mine, Lily Kind, is a really brilliant choreographer, and she has a collection of people that she calls Wolf Thicket. So I'm a member of Wolf Thicket, and we have rehearsal every Monday morning, and Wolf Thicket is this pretty wild, collaborative, movement-based project that, oh man, can I just look up what she wrote about it? I want to actually give her a shout out. Hold on. So Lily writes that Wolf Thicket, which is this female and femme-identifying people movement project. She says, Wolf Thicket is a dance theater spectacle. It is a place, the periphery, the woods, the schoolyard, the basement. It is games of make-believe, hopscotch, hand painting, tennis, music video, sunbathing. It is a world of women who feed it. So it's sort of this like really multidisciplinary movement project that the only reason that I'm able to be, you know, like most choreographers are like, oh, if you're on call and like you can't come to this rehearsal, like, sorry, like no go. But Lily, you know, I've basically been when I first joined the project, I had just broken my foot and like couldn't even walk. And then I like transitioned into being a full-time doula and was like, sorry, Lily, can't come to rehearsal. I'm at a birth. And I think Lily's like driving perspective is that like this project encompasses all of our lives. So like if I'm at a birth, that's my version of being present at the rehearsal, and she's going to take that information and like bring it into the space with her as part of her creative process. So that's been really feeding me as kind of this like movement practice every Monday morning from 10 to 12 with the other Wolf Thicket members. You know, and sometimes we'll just like stand together on our Zoom call and like Lily will put on a song and we'll just like shake our whole bodies for 5 minutes straight, and that's our warm up, you know? Or sometimes my dance practice will look like putting on a song and just deciding to move nonstop any way I want until the song is over. For a couple days in quarantine, me and my roommates were doing these like place-based performances where like I live with a band and we would like set up all of the musical instruments in the kitchen or the bathroom, and then I would like perform on the countertops or in my bathtub.
That is so cool. We're getting the bathtub picture to add to Instagram also this week.
So that's kind of my at-home movement practice these days, the wacky and wonderful practice. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like how to bring movement into our lives, I'm like, I don't know, just like pay attention, you know, like set a timer for 1 minute and like stand still and let yourself pay attention to what impulses arrive, you know, and maybe that's just like noticing that your body sways no matter how hard you try to stand still, because our bodies are always in motion. Or maybe it's like, you know, just finding a little bit of like a spiral in your torso as you stand there. But I think that for me, you know, movement is just like this place of intuitive discovery, and there's no wrong way to do it. Getting in water is also really important. I've been trying to swim a lot these days. I have a nice little swimming hole. That's also a movement practice for me.
That's one thing I remember about you is when I first was getting to know you and asking about how you do self-care after a birth. You're like, I find a body of water to dip myself in as soon as possible. If that means pulling over somewhere.
Yeah, I've definitely like done skinny dipping in some like weird suburban creeks. But yeah.
Well, sweet. I just joined a pool, so I'm counting swimming and whatever. It's cold water. It's not warm enough to get in yet, but within the next few days or weeks, when it gets warm enough that I get in with my children, that can be my embodiment, dancing, reclaiming, being a dancer. I can be a West Philly doula dancer named Elizabeth, and we can start a new club.
It's going to be even more exclusive.
Even more exclusive, but very, 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 very worthwhile.
How cool. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for all of this. I feel like I'm walking away with like, okay, I'm going to actually focus on just the bare minimum. What can I trust my body? You know, like, yeah, this is great. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work as a dancing doula?
Totally. Well, you can visit my website. It's www.elizabethweinsteinbirth.com. Or you can check me out on Instagram, which is just my full name, elizabeth.weinstein.
Cool. I'm going to follow you for sure.
And we'll link those from our show notes so people can find that. We will repost those Instagram pictures and be getting that ballerina picture from you. In addition to people finding you, if people could replicate your heart for the world by being generous towards something that you feel strongly about, where could we encourage our listeners to show generosity on your behalf?
I have been directing people to donate to the Philly COVID-19 Birth Fund, which is a birth fund that has been created by some birth activists in Philadelphia, some midwives and some doulas, basically raising money to support families of color to have access to home birth. Unfortunately, because of state licensure laws in Pennsylvania, home birth midwives are not covered. CPM home birth midwives are not covered by insurance, and for a lot of reasons, because of COVID-19, because of systemic racism, hospitals are not always the safest place for low-risk families to give birth, particularly families of color and particularly Black families. So this fund is raising $50,000 to support 20 families to have access to home birth if they so choose, because birth is our way into the world. It's, our first dance, and it really matters. And so, I think that income or money should not be a barrier to being able to have choice in where you give birth, and being able to have a choice in where you can safely give birth. So I think they've raised $27,000 out of $50,000. I believe 8 people have been matched already. They've used other funds to match families, and now they just have to make it to the $50,000 goal in order to keep matching families who are seeking this kind of care.
And what's it called again?
It's the COVID-19 Philly Birth Fund.
Okay. We'll link that in our show notes and on our website. Cool.
Amazing. I've gotten chills like 6 or 8 times at least just during this time together. So it was so precious for us that we got to spend this time with you. So thank you. Thank you for all you do in the world and who you are in this world, and that you gave us this slice of your time that we got to savor and enjoy that. And I'm so thrilled that we get to share you with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Now it's our turn to hear from you. So would you do us a big favor and go into your podcast app and rate us? Even better, would you write us a glowing review? That will help other listeners to find us. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
You can also visit our website at everydaythinplaces.com, where you will find all sorts of fun and interesting information, as well as learn about how you can help to support this podcast and earn special exclusive perks. There you will also find links to follow us on social media, or else just pop directly over to Instagram or Facebook, where you will find us at Everyday Thin Places. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Rachel. Bye.